themselves as well as everyone else. They literally make the world a better place, which you can actually calculate and give it a numerical value. The higher that number, the more intelligent they are. Remember that this has nothing to do with how much they have studied, how much money they have, what their IQ is. This is purely calculating how good they're doing for themselves and everyone else at the same time. The helpless take actions that benefit others while hurting themselves. You see where I'm going with this. The bandits do things that benefit themselves while causing losses to others. Usually the helpless. And of course, on the polar opposite of the intelligent, you have the stupid. With their unpredictable, seemingly nonsensical and utterly stupid actions, they hurt themselves and everyone else around them. Let's see some examples. Say someone shoots you in the leg just to rob you of $50. Or if they kill you so they can rape your wife for one night. That's not a very good bandit. First off, their benefit is very slim while taking extremely big risks. And the loss for you and others is huge. A perfect bandit is somewhere on this line. Huge benefit for themselves with either no losses for you or a lot. The rapist murderer, on the other hand, is somewhere around here, very close to the border of sheer stupidity. Those behind the multinational corporation that, in order to save some quids, cause one of the biggest environmental disasters and public health crisis in human history, are also pretty close to be utterly stupid. Again, small gain, huge loss. To themselves too. The helpless usually do not recognize how dangerous stupid people are. This is not at all surprising. Their failure to understand is just another expression of their helplessness. What's truly astounding is that also intelligent people and bandits fail to recognize how dangerous stupid people are. If you're intelligent, you think you can predict and somehow counteract the actions of stupid people. And if you're a bandit, you think you can take advantage of them. Oh, you are so wrong. First off, you might think that a stupid person will only do harm to themselves. But this is confusing the stupid with the helpless. Let me be perfectly clear. It is impossible to gain or take advantage of stupid people. All they will do is bring you misery and suffering for inexplicable reasons which go beyond your understanding. Always. And that's the whole point. Their actions are incomprehensible. You can understand the actions of a bandit. They want more for themselves and they don't care about you. You know this so you can reasonably predict what they're gonna do. The same goes for the helpless. They will be taken advantage of by the bandits. They just can't help themselves. But a stupid person, it's a whole different thing. And the worst part about it is they don't know that they're stupid. If they did, they would do something to stop hurting themselves for no apparent reason, which would make them less stupid. It's an endless trap of stupidity. Which brings us to the fourth law. Non-stupid people always underestimate the damaging power of stupid individuals. I think you get the point by now. The fifth and last law is really just a corollary of the previous four. A stupid person is the most dangerous type of person, which also means that a stupid person is more dangerous than a bandit. If you think about society as a whole, if everyone were a bandit, there would be no net loss for society, just a transfer of wealth and welfare from one person to another. And overall, they would cancel each other out. Society wouldn't get better, but also wouldn't get any worse. And if everyone were intelligent, we would all be better off and we would live in a more sane society which improved exponentially over time. But when stupid people are at work, the story is completely different. Now, because of the second law, the number of stupid people is not affected by time, race, space, or any other socioeconomic factor. So how do we explain a thriving society versus a collapsing civilization? Remember that both societies are plagued by the same percentage of stupid people, sigma. The difference is that in declining societies, stupid people have power. The helpless can help themselves, but the intelligent and the bandits should. So it's their fault. If you're watching this video, you're probably intelligent or a bandit. Either way, this framework should help you understand the dangers of stupidity and that you should avoid it at all costs. In particular, if you want the society you live in to thrive and not go into chaos, stop putting stupid people in position of power where they can exercise their talents and make everyone miserable. If you can, put someone intelligent. But if you absolutely can't and all you can choose from is between a bandit and a stupid person, choose the bandit. At least you'll know how they will act and you can take the necessary precautions. Also, a big part of your job is trying to convince the helpless when they're not being fooled by the bandits or the stupid. Last, nobody's perfectly consistent with their actions. So if sometimes you do something very stupid and then you're fooled by someone, but generally you're doing pretty intelligent things, on average, you're intelligent. So where you fall in the quadrants is calculated as the overall weighted average position of all the actions you take in your life. To help you with your mission in making the world less stupid, I have prepared these handy prints, link in the description. It's simple. Put the name of your friend, co-worker, boss, lover, or whatever in here. And day by day, map all of their actions. Do this for a while, and very soon you'll have a pretty good picture of whether that person is a bandit, intelligent, helpless, or stupid. And if they're stupid, there is only one thing you can do. Run away from them. For the really adventurous, you can ask your friends to do the same for you. And if it turns out that you're stupid, and then you think about it, and you accept it, then you're not so stupid after all. And there is hope for you too. I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly had a lot of fun doing it. If you'd like to read the original essay by Cipolla, I highly recommend it. You'll find the link in the video description. If you like this video, remember to subscribe to this channel. And if you want to make sure that I can keep making videos like this, consider supporting me on Konos, where you can pledge whatever you feel like, and you can follow all the courses I'm teaching and learning divided by subject. Thank you for being curious.
Create professional and beautiful videos faster with Envato Elements.
On January the 22nd, 2017, Kellyanne Conway, counsellor to the US President, was invited onto the weekly NBC show Meet the Press to discuss the recent inauguration ceremony of Donald Trump. Something of a controversy had risen up over the past few days surrounding the size of the crowd that had turned up to witness the event. Trump himself had promised an unbelievable, perhaps record-breaking turnout. However, when it came to it, the ceremony drew a crowd only around a third of the size of that which had witnessed Barack Obama first take the oath of office in 2009. Not keen to admit defeat, however, the Trump administration had gone on the offensive, with Sean Spicer, then White House press secretary, defying experts in crowd size and reporters on the ground to state that the event had attracted the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period. When Conway, on Meet the Press, was asked by host Chuck Todd why the press secretary would utter a provable falsehood, she responded that Sean Spicer had not lied, but instead given alternative facts. Conway's use of that phrase drew a barrage of criticism from the liberal wing of the world's media. Trump had, of course, regularly derided what he termed fake news on the campaign trail, but pundits and commentators had spent the previous few weeks wondering whether moving into the White House might see him begin to act in a more composed and statesmanlike manner. This episode seemed to not only disprove such a thesis, but also set the scene for a presidency which has often appeared to be engaged in a war of attrition with the very fabric of reality. The response from most of the mainstream media has generally been to ridicule each of Trump's lies as they have emerged. The website PolitiFact, for instance, keeps a list of all false statements involving Donald Trump, in which each falsehood uttered by the president is recorded alongside a brief summary of why it is a lie or, at best, only partially rooted in reality. And such reporting is important. We might, following Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky, be aware that the huge inequality in command of resources often leads to the media offering only limited critiques of those in power. Yet here it does seem to be functioning as a public service, recording and countering the pernicious lies of those in power. We seem to be living in an era of fake news, often propagated by some of the very individuals who themselves have popularized that phrase. In the age of Trump, Brexit and other populist movements across the world, the political battleground, whether in relation to the climate emergency, immigration, healthcare or whatever else, often seems to be less orientated around finding the best responses to certain issues, but instead around trying to figure out the truth of what those issues are in the first place. Political debate seems to have been transformed into a call and response of falsehoods and corrections, lies and debunkings. Today, I want to go beyond that tendency to just want to correct lies when we see them spoken, to consider the deeper effects of such a discursive turn. In doing so, I'm going to draw on the work of Guy Debord, who, in his 1967 book Society of the Spectacle, suggested that society had become obsessed with images and appearances at the expense of experience and observable truth. It's a book that I've touched upon a number of times before, yet this video should be as self-contained as possible, for it seems to me that Debord's suggestion that our culture and politics have become less and less grounded in lived experience has much to tell us about living in an age of mistruth and what happens when a society loses touch with that which is real. As always, if you have any thoughts, suggestions or questions as we go along, then please don't hesitate to pop those down below in the comments. And if you're new around here and this seems like your kind of thing, then please do consider subscribing. Finally, if you would like to get your hands on the script to these videos and some other goodies, then please do check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Tom Nicholas. With that out of the way, however, let's crack on with fake news, alternative facts, and the spectacular politics of Donald Trump. Over the past few years, there's been an increased popular interest in Guy Debord's 1967 treatise, Society of the Spectacle. Although now over 50 years old, mainstream journalists have turned to the book often as a potential source of insight into the present world and, in particular, the rise to power of President Donald Trump. Scanning through Society of the Spectacle, one can see why it has proven so alluring. Debord begins by declaring that in societies dominated by modern conditions of production, life is presented as an immense accumulation of spectacles. Or, to put it in simpler terms, the contemporary capitalist society has become increasingly obsessed with images and appearances over experience and observable truth. Even prior to running for office, Donald Trump offered an interesting case study of this phenomenon. As the host for The Apprentice, Trump would set a series of contestants a business-related task each week before, at the end of each episode, inviting them into the boardroom in Trump Tower, where, from the comfort of his leather throne, he would decide who would be fired and who would continue on in the competition. Now, as opponents have been keen to point out of late, Trump's own business career has been far from flawless. He's been involved in numerous bankruptcy declarations and launched countless businesses that have quickly floundered. Yet, to the producers, to the contestants, to the viewers of the show, all of this seemed irrelevant. He lived in a tower and had a golden toilet. There can be few better indicators that society might have come to centre on, in Debord's words, an affirmation of appearances and an identification of all human social life with appearances than a man who, by living in the right building and having the correct taste in interior decor, came to be seen as a figurehead for an economic system which he had failed to have much of a meaningful impact on. Throughout his work, Debord was adamant that it is not only those who find themselves the hosts of reality TV shows that have increasingly come to rely on appearances in this way. As I explore in one of my other videos on Guy Debord, we all do. Many of us spend as much time on social media attempting to appear happy, successful and fulfilled by life as we do actually seeking out genuine self-fulfillment. Today, however, I do want to focus on those in the public eye. For Debord does suggest that celebrities such as Trump have a special role to play in the society of the spectacle. He argues that such is the power of the images of excess that surround us, we have come to view our real lives as mundane and boring. Perhaps, for many, life under capitalism has made it so. Stars, however, in Debord's understanding of contemporary capitalism, serve as spectacular representations of living human beings, and project this general banality into images of permitted roles. Celebrities act as role models that we can aspire to be like, yet in doing so they tend to comply with certain societal norms, and in encouraging us to build our lives in their image, therefore sustain the status quo. Here again, pre-presidency Trump provided a great deal of support to Debord's argument. Trump's wealth is primarily inherited, yet he has managed to distort this through curating an image of himself as a self-made businessman who has earned his fortune through his mastery of the art of the deal. Thus, he continues to perpetuate the grand narrative of American capitalism that anyone can make it to the top if they have the right skills and ambition. Multiple people have argued that much of Donald Trump's success in the Republican primary process and then in the 2016 presidential election itself can be attributed to his transferring of the spectacle of celebrity to the political sphere. Douglas Kellner, for instance, has argued that Trump represents a stage of spectacle beyond De Boer's model of spectacle and consumer capitalism, in which spectacle has come to colonize politics, culture, and everyday life, with the chief manipulator of the spectacle in the United States, Donald J. Trump, now becoming president and collapsing politics into entertainment and spectacle. One way in which we might suggest that this is so is in how Trump, first as candidate then as president, has pivoted how he presents himself, from being a personification of wealth and exuberance to a champion of the working class. Despite his multiple affairs, he has also managed to endear himself with the US's white evangelical community. His garnering of support for both of those constituencies has relied heavily on his channeling of anger at the status quo. He's presented himself as an insurgent force ready to drain the swamp and upturn the cozy political establishment, an image that has only been supported by the liberal portion of the world's media. De Boer has much to say about such acts. He writes that, by invoking any number of different criteria, the spectacle can present false political oppositions as totally distinct social systems. But in reality, they are nothing but particular sectors whose fundamental essences lies in the global system that contains them. The single movement that has turned the whole planet into its field of operation, capitalism. De Boer thus suggests that politicians often co-opt anger at the status quo in such a way, yet whilst having little intention of doing anything more than mildly modifying the prevailing capitalist order, or in Trump's case, further reinforcing its inequities. What I'm primarily interested in today, however, is not these nefarious appeals to, say, the cause of the working class voter, but Trump's bolder deceits. For politicians attempting to curate a false or at best half-true image of themselves in the public eye is neither new nor unique to Donald Trump. In fact, so prevalent is such an act that entire TV shows such as The Thick of It, Veep, and House of Cards are able to build their plots around the challenges that the domination of the political sphere by appearances over policy might present for those trying to do good, and the opportunities it might afford to those with more nefarious intentions. In each of these shows, however, the protagonists go to great lengths to hide the fact that they might be misrepresenting themselves or the facts around a particular issue. And long before he ran for president, Trump had little time for trying to conceal his lies in this way. Instead, he has regularly made claims that are not only false or highly exaggerated, but to any critical observer, obviously and openly so. The first question that we might want to ask of Trump and co.'s blatant propagation of falsehoods is why? For, as documented by House of Cards and similar shows, the guiding principle of previous political epochs was that a politician should do their best to conceal when they are lying, and do their best to look statesperson-like at all times. This was the bedrock of Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 and remains that of many of the more milquetoast candidates in the Democratic primaries this time around. And this in itself is a kind of spectacular politics, built on appearances over policy. Yet Trump's very obvious lies often seem to rupture this facade. And the reason he does so, to my mind, is fairly simple. The more ridiculous a statement he makes, the greater the number of headlines, opinion pieces, and Twitter threads it inspires. Capitalizing on scandal in this way has been a mainstay of Trump's career throughout his life, Yet, it was something he perfected during the Republican primaries in the lead up to the 2016 election. His outbursts during press conferences, at rallies, in debates, and on Twitter allowed him to soak up press attention to the point where few other candidates could get a look in. And there is simply no need to be the best candidate when you've obscured all others from view. De Boer writes frequently in the Society of the Spectacle of the glitter of spectacular distractions which provide relief from the banalisation which dominates modern society the world over. In a world where politics, perhaps above all else, is often deemed boring, Trump proved a distraction par excellence. Yes, as many people might have loved him as hated him, yet the absurdity of his candidacy proved far more engaging than watching Barack Obama and Mitt Romney debate the minutiae of taxation ever was in the previous cycle. Trump recognises this and uses it to his advantage, aware that to increase the ridiculousness of his claims is to allow him to further dominate the news cycle. Yet what effect does this prevalence of lying have on our political discourse? For when we think of political lying, we tend to think of propaganda. And the popular understanding of the goal of propaganda is to present us with a false yet totalizing view of the world, which is ultimately convincing. In the wake of the Alternative Facts episode, which I recounted at the beginning of this video, for instance, sales of George Orwell's 1984 shot through the roof. Penguin, in fact, had to print an extra 75,000 copies just to keep up with demand. And that book ends with its protagonist, Winston Smith, staring up at a portrait of Big Brother, the figurehead of the society in which he lives, declaring his love for him. Any doubt in the official ideology of Oceania he previously had having been expunged from his mind. To a large extent, De Boer suggests that the end product of the Society of the Spectacle is that a populace does almost exactly the same. In his 1988 text Comments on the Society of the Spectacle, in which he expands upon some of his earlier ideas, De Boer argues that the spectacle's domination has succeeded in raising a whole generation moulded to its laws. He essentially suggests that capitalist ideology has become so widespread as to be almost unquestioned by many. Then perhaps this is the case, but Trump's failure to conceal his mistruths seemed to disrupt any potential for Trumpism to ever be uncritically accepted in this way. Whether it is his intention or not, by lying so blatantly, Trump seems to encourage more critical thinking, not less. But perhaps this is less of an intrinsically great thing than we might first want to think. For Trump and his surrogates have regularly used the phrase fake news to encourage a level of skepticism of the mainstream media. And the alternative facts that he does espouse have often been viewed as the other side of this coin, an attempt to construct what De Boer, among many others, have called a false consciousness, or a sort of alternative conception of the world. Yet the blatancy with which Trump lies disrupts his chances of having anyone but his most loyal followers actually believe in this totalizing worldview that he offers. Nevertheless, both Trump's assertions as to fake news and his falsehoods continue to engender a sense of distrust amongst those in the wider population. The initial object of skepticism may indeed be Trump himself, as it is he who is lying, yet they awaken that part of our brains which seeks to criticize everything. If Trump is lying, we come to think, then maybe all politicians are. If Trump's position on taxation is based on utter falsehoods, then maybe all positions on such issues are too. Such a tendency to engage in this more generalised sense of scepticism has been most evident among some of the very news publications who have been so hostile to this notion of fake news. Katie Halper, for instance, has pointed to the manner in which the New York Times has attempted to draw equivalencies between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. If there's liars and opportunists on the right, the argument seems to be, then surely there must also be liars and opportunists on the left too. In his 2009 book, The Emancipated Spectator, Jacques Rancière forwards a similar argument of left-leaning cultural critiques based on Debord's Society of the Spectacle. He writes that Debord's ideas were supposed to denounce the machinery of social domination in order to equip those challenging it with new weapons. Today, it has become exactly the opposite. A disenchanted knowledge of the reign of the commodity and the spectacle, of the equivalence between everything and everything else, and between everything and its own image. There has grown a tendency to simply argue that everything is merely spectacle, and to sit back and disinterestedly gloat that one is aware of this. The critical thinking and skepticism are obviously vital and important, yet the goal of Debord's text was not to encourage us to view everything as spectacle, but to see through the appearances it relies upon to the truth concealed within. A tendency towards the former at the expense of the latter has, I think, been growing for some time. Yet Trump's propagation of blatant falsehoods has further solidified a societal mindset in which all that we might previously have held to be true is now up for debate. Such a scenario may mean that the spectacle and the society which has fallen under its spell has evolved to a point where Debord's description of it is slightly less relevant. Yet his writing still offers us much useful insight. For Debord writes that the domination of the spectacle led to a world in which there is no place left where people can discuss the realities which concern them, because they can never lastingly free themselves from the crushing presence of media discourse. He is suggesting here that capitalist ideology has become so dominant that it is no longer possible for many to discuss the issues facing us in a manner which imagines a world beyond that particular economic and political system. I'm not sure that this point in relation to capitalism is necessarily the case in the present. Nevertheless, the widespread skepticism which pervades contemporary political discourse does equally take away our ability to have the rich conversations that imagining alternatives to the present system require. For productive political debate requires some kind of shared understanding of the world. Whilst we might come to different, sometimes very different solutions, it requires us to have a shared understanding of the problems that we are aiming to address. Where the spectacular rhetoric of fake news and alternative facts has succeeded then, is not in presenting us with a series of false solutions to the world's problems, but in making it ever more challenging to agree what the problems themselves are in the first place. It seems to me that the blatant falsehoods offered up by Trump and his supporters, both online and off, have primarily provoked a response centered around debunking and responding by pointing to the flaws in that worldview. And again, such an act is important. Yet such efforts often seem to be driven by the notion that society is at risk of falling under a 1984-style subjugation to Trumpism. I don't think that's much of a risk. What is more likely, to my mind, is a scenario in which we become so prone to questioning every tiny fact that we are presented with that we lack any meaningful basis for political discussion at all. The challenge then lies not only in critiquing the pernicious lies of Trump et al., but also in risking the charge of naivety by refinding that which we might share with those who are at risk of believing all that such figures promote. For it is through doing so that we can rebuild a more genuine discourse and begin to work towards a more just world. Thank you very much for watching this video. I had so many requests to do another video based around the Society of the Spectacle, so I hope this has lived up to expectations in some way. Thanks as always to Ash, to J. Fraser Cartwright and to Michael V. Brown for signing up to the top tier of my Patreon page. If you would like to get a copy of the script for this video or some of my others, then I would massively appreciate you going to patreon.com/Tom Nicholas and checking that out. Other than that, a like on this video or a sharing it somewhere where others might enjoy it is always much appreciated. But thank you very much for watching once again, and have a great week. Hi, my name's Tom. Welcome back to my channel to another episode of What the Theory, my ongoing series of accessible introductions to key theories in cultural studies and the wider humanities. Today, we're taking a look at neoliberalism. See, I'm aware that I use the term neoliberalism, or alternatively neoliberal capitalism, a fair bit in my videos. And indeed, in the past decade or so, the term has become pretty pervasive in popular discourse. But, and I include myself in this, it is very rarely fully unpacked and explained. So today, I wanted to do just that. Because understanding neoliberalism, which, as I hope to show in the course of this video, is the guiding economic, political and social ideology in much of the world in the present day, is essential for having a fully rounded understanding of the political events, cultural forms and social phenomena that occur within the society that ideology resides over. Before we get going, I'd like to say a quick thanks to Michael V. Brown for signing up to the top tier of my Patreon, which you can find out a little bit more information about down below, and to encourage you, if you're new around here and this seems like your kind of thing, to consider subscribing and hitting that notifications bell. With that out of the way, however, let's crack on with neoliberalism, what the theory? Neoliberalism is, at heart, a political ideology which holds that the primary bond between humans is not social, familial, cultural, political, or anything else, but instead purely economic. All of our interactions and associations with other humans are, neoliberalism posits, driven purely by self-interest and motivated by what we might stand to gain economically from that interaction or association. Far from viewing this as a negative, however, neoliberalism sees this as something to be celebrated and encouraged. For it argues that it is this self-interest that is the driving force of human progress, and thus that, as the character Gordon Gekko puts it in Oliver Stone's 1987 film Wall Street, greed, for lack of a better word, is good. My starting of this YouTube channel, for instance, would be viewed by neoliberals, though few people actually claim that term as a political identity, as inherently self-interested. It was not that I wanted to share knowledge out of the kindness of my heart or a belief in education or anything rubbish like that, but instead because I thought I could stand to gain economically from doing so. Now, for some, such an analysis would devalue the videos that I put out. Neoliberalism, however, holds that this is not the case. Despite my purely self-interested motivations, a body of videos was still created which potentially helped some people understand the humanities a bit better. Furthermore, neoliberals would suggest that the quality of these videos, if they can be said to have a level of quality at all, is greatly aided by the competition I'm faced with on YouTube and elsewhere. For in order to make as much money as possible, which, as we've established, is my sole reason for doing this, I need to create the very best videos possible. And the fact that the School of Life, say, has also covered some of the topics that I have, forces me to up my game in a manner that if there wasn't any competition and I were the only educational YouTuber around, I might not. The liberalism element of the term neoliberalism may cause some confusion here. Today, we're more likely to think of liberalism in terms of social liberalism and advocacy for civic rights, particularly for individuals and groups who may hitherto have been marginalised. Supporters of neoliberalism, however, see this as, in Milton Friedman's words, a corruption of the term. The liberal part of the term neoliberalism, then, instead takes its inspiration from the classical liberalism of the 18th and 19th centuries, which was primarily interested in promoting economic liberty, the ability to act as one sees fit with one's money, particularly, detractors might add, if one has a lot of it. For if we take this view that human progress, and thus to some extent social good, is driven purely by economic motivations, then it stands to reason that we would want any barriers to the kind of economic exchanges and interactions which enable that progress to be removed. Neoliberalism, then, argues that the world is best organised and governed by what Adam Smith referred to as the invisible hand of the market, and not, as others might think, by states, governments, or any kind of democratic institution. In some regards, then, neoliberalism is a brand of philosophic thought which makes claims on the human condition. But it has, and continues to, make these claims largely as a way of building support for a very real, existing economic and political system. From my description so far, one might argue that system is merely capitalism, and that proposing a new word to describe it is almost pointless. Yet, in truth, capitalism is a pretty broad term, and as both a theory for how the world should work and as a social reality, capitalism has changed many times since its emergence. Neoliberalism, then, is a term which we use to articulate a specific form of capitalism, which is dominant across much of the world in the present day. I'm going to spend most of this video, which, if there's any interest, could be the first in a short series, discussing how neoliberalism came to be so dominant in the present day. This will enable us both to compare it to the form of capitalism which existed before, while also allowing us to look beyond neoliberalism as a philosophy in the abstract, and instead explore how some of those ideas have manifested into a social.
Create professional and beautiful videos faster with Envato Elements. Get unlimited downloads of video and audio assets for your next project.
Reality. Our story begins in the aftermath of the Second World War, when, following 6 years of conflict, people in the capitalist nations were trying to work out what their newfound peace might look like. You see, capitalism was, at this point, experiencing something of a lull in popularity. Memories of the economic crises of the 1920s and 1930s and of the Great Depression still loomed large in the popular consciousness, and many were keen to avoid the repetition of such a scenario. Unusually, perhaps, this was as true of economic elites as it was of ordinary folk. See, as Harvey Clare documents in his 1984 book The Heyday of American Communism, the pre-war period had seen a considerable rise in support for communism, even in the nation which is often considered most immune to its allure. Elsewhere, this global depression had played a role in the rise of fascism in Europe and setting the scene for the now ended conflict. In short, there was a general level of agreement then that, in order to ensure a sustainable peace and the continuation of capitalism, it was vital to stabilise relations between nations and also socio-economic classes. Robert Dahl and Charles Lindblom summarised mainstream thinking about the economy in the post-war period well when they declared that both socialism and capitalism are dead, and that, instead, a compromise needed to be drawn between the two systems. Drawing heavily on the work of the British economist John Maynard Keynes, the vast majority of the advanced capitalist nations, including America, the UK, and much of the rest of Western Europe, thus began to move towards a mixed economic system, in which, as Robert Pollin explains, ownership and control of the economy as means of production would remain in the hands of private capitalists, and that most economic activity would be guided by market forces, yet which also introduced policy interventions to counteract capitalism's inherent tendencies toward financial breakdowns, depressions, and mass unemployment. Many sectors of the economy, chief among them the financial sector, though remaining in private hands, thus came to be very heavily regulated in order to foster a level of economic stability. Alongside this, many nations also introduced social welfare programs in the vein of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, which gave aid to those who fell on hard times. Some, such as the UK, also nationalised certain industries, such as the energy sector or telecommunications industry, which were likely to perform better when centrally planned, rather than when being open to competition. This mixed economy model, which, after John Maynard Keynes, is often referred to as Keynesian economics, came to dominate post-war approaches to government and the economy, and such an approach was vindicated by the consistent economic growth witnessed over the subsequent decades. In the early 1970s, however, the capitalist world began to slide into recession. There were several reasons for this, primary among them perhaps the OPEC crisis, in which a group of oil exporting countries in the Middle East began an embargo on several Western nations, thus significantly increasing the price of electricity and petrol. And when this crisis hit, many of the economic elites who had hesitantly accepted the compromises of the post-war era grew fidgety. For, as David Harvey writes in his brief history of neoliberalism, one condition of the post-war settlement in almost all countries was that the economic power of the upper classes be restrained, and that labour be accorded a much larger share of the economic pie. While growth was strong, this restraint seemed not to matter. To have a stable share of an increasing pie is one thing, but when growth collapsed in the 1970s, then upper classes everywhere felt threatened. Worried that their wealth might be under threat, economic elites and their political allies thus sought to use the crisis in order to wrest back control of the economy and, by extension, society. Luckily for them, a group of economists known as the Mont Pelerin Society had, since 1946, been building a body of work critical of Keynesian economics and of government intervention in the economy as a whole. The society included among its members Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek, who importantly made the case for an end to Keynesian economics from a deeply philosophical standpoint. This was crucial, for arguing simply that private enterprise should be allowed to run riot with no oversight from democratically elected governments would likely have been laughed off by voters. Instead, the Mont Pelerin Society reframed government regulation and intervention in the economy as an attack on the central values of civilization. Over large stretches of the Earth's surface, they wrote in the Society's founding statement of aims, the essential conditions of human dignity and freedom have already disappeared. In others, they are under constant menace from the development of current tendencies of policy. The position of the individual and the voluntary group are progressively undermined by extension of arbitrary power. The idea that government should regulate the economy in order to ensure stability and to protect against individual, societal or environmental harm was thus repositioned as an overextension of power and an attack on individual liberty. The presentation of the neoliberal agenda as one founded in a respect for individual liberties was notable. For, as those of you who have watched my video on Guy Debord's The Society of the Spectacle will know, the 1960s had seen a wave of discontent with governments across America and much of Europe, and in some regards, the rhetoric of the neoliberals dovetailed with that of the anti-Vietnam War and anti-consumerism movements. As, again, David Harvey writes, Though opposition to the Vietnam War was a clear consistency in these movements across different nations, intense restrictions on individual possibilities and personal behaviours by state-mandated and traditional controls were also widely resented. For almost everyone in the movement of '68, the intrusive state was the enemy and it had to be reformed, and on that, the neoliberals could agree. Nevertheless, neoliberalism took this popular current of discontent, which was initially socially liberal or at least left-leaning, and channeled it in a manner which instead sought to bolden capitalist interests. What Manfred Steger and Ravi Roy refer to as the first wave of neoliberalism, then, is widely considered to have begun following the election of Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1979 and that of Ronald Reagan as President of the United States in 1981. For it was these two politicians, among others in the broadly English-speaking world, who took the neoliberal theories developed by the Mont Pelerin Society and began their implementation. The reforms of both leaders were significant and far-reaching. It is notable and somewhat revealing of who stood to benefit most from neoliberal reforms, however, that the first aspect of what they saw as government overreach into the market that both sought to roll back was taxation, particularly on the richest in society. In the 1970s, the highest tax rate in the UK was 83%, whilst in the US it was 70%. By the time that Thatcher and Reagan were finished, it was just 40% in the UK and 28% in the US. The argument, with which many of us are now pretty well acquainted, was that the wealthiest in society having more money to spend would lead to greater investment and thus to increased economic growth to the benefit of all. Yet, as Owen Zidar has recently shown in an issue of the Journal of Political Economy, such a claim was and remains fairly spurious, with the wealthy far more likely to simply hoard their extra earnings. Where previously incremental tax policies had sought to stabilise the gap between rich and poor, then, the implementation of so-called trickle-down tax policies enabled economic elites to take a far greater share of the national wealth, something which was made only more possible by both Thatcher and Reagan's deregulation of the financial sector. Another way in which these newly empowered neoliberals sought to roll back government intervention in the economy was in the privatisation of industries that had previously been run by government-owned entities. This was more clearly the case in the UK than in the US, where Margaret Thatcher sold off key utility industries such as the energy and telecommunications sectors, arguing that the services provided by each could be provided more efficiently and thus at a lower price than they could under government control. What I'd like to focus on here, however, is the efforts that both leaders went to in pursuit of curtailing the power of trade and labour unions in their respective countries. For, despite the Mont Pelerin Society's appeals to the sanctity of the voluntary group, neoliberalism tends to view unions as an improper incursion on the functioning of the market. In neoliberal thinking, the price of a commodity or service should be governed solely by the price that consumers, me or you, are willing to pay for it, and thus employees demanding a higher wage or greater benefits is deemed a distortion of that price. In what are now seen as pretty symbolic moments in capital-labour relations in each country, then, both Reagan's firing of around 13,000 air traffic controllers for going on strike and Thatcher's defeat of the miners during the 1984 miners' strike in the UK led to both a perceived and real diminishing of the ability of workers to hold their bosses to account. The changes implemented by both Thatcher and Reagan deeply changed the structure of each nation's economy, and similar, if sometimes less extreme, examples of what Stuart Hall referred to as a neoliberal revolution can be observed in nations across the world. Alongside the actual reforming of the economy, however, this first wave of neoliberalism managed to fundamentally alter popular opinion on what the relationship between governments and private corporations should be. Thatcher frequently presented her political programme as not even being a choice, instead declaring that there is no alternative. And when Reagan's Republican Party and Thatcher's Conservative Party were eventually succeeded by their traditional political rivals, the Democrats and Labour, in the 1990s, it seemed that this posturing might have worked. It must be said that both Bill Clinton and Tony Blair introduced several policies which sought to both further civil liberties for marginalised groups or support those in poverty, which would have turned Reagan and Thatcher's stomachs. Nevertheless, in terms of the overall structure of the economy, both spent much of their time in office enthusiastically furthering the neoliberal agenda. Most importantly, both did a great deal to remove barriers to trading across borders. For though the pursuit of a border-free global marketplace was very much a founding principle of neoliberalism, neither Reagan, Thatcher, nor any of their contemporaries had been all that successful in bringing about such a scenario. Alongside continuing privatisation and deregulation efforts on home turf, then, both Clinton and Blair set out to sign their respective nations up to ever-expanding continental and global trade deals. Clinton entered the US into the North American Free Trade Agreement, and Tony Blair further integrated the UK into the European Union. Most notable, however, was both leaders' promotion of the World Trade Organization. Formally, the establishment of the WTO aimed to bring what regulation was in force in different countries into line in order that goods and services produced in one country could be sold in another fairly easily, and also to reduce import and export tariffs. Market globalization is a complex and complicated phenomenon and has not been entirely unproblematic in countries such as the UK or US, with the reduction of tariffs certainly emboldening the ability of large corporations to relocate factories and therefore jobs to countries where wages are far lower. Yet, as Naomi Klein has argued in her 2007 book The Shock Doctrine, international organisations such as the WTO, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, both of which were significantly reformed in the 1970s and 1980s to be strong advocates for neoliberalism, have been regularly used in order to force neoliberal policies on many nations in the global south, with little regard to whether the citizens or elected representatives of that nation wanted it or not. That, however, is enough of a subject to fill a whole other video. But the forced implementation of neoliberalism on such nations in many regards reveals the utopian, to some, dream at the heart of the neoliberal vision of the world. In his 2016 documentary Hypernormalization, Adam Curtis suggests that neoliberals ache for a world without politics, in which economic elites and large corporations are able to operate without the inconvenience of democratic institutions acting on behalf of ordinary people, interfering in their affairs or otherwise holding them to account. And both the deregulation of domestic economies and the fostering of a global marketplace has led to a scenario in which this is increasingly the case. For the reforms of the neoliberal revolution have not only led to an increase in wealth and income inequality, but also greatly disempowered governments in relation to multinational corporations. To draw on just two examples, the speed with which the governments of many nations folded and bailed out the banks in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and also the inability of legislatures to hold social media platforms to account for severely infringing on their ability to hold free and fair elections, show how weak governments increasingly are in comparison to economic elites. On the one hand, such corporations now have so much wealth as to be able to greatly influence who is likely to be sitting in the world's congresses and parliaments. On the other, A global marketplace enables corporations to use the threat of relocating away from one country to another, taking with them jobs and what tax they don't avoid, to keep them acting in their favour. So, to conclude, as I mentioned in my introduction to this video, it may seem possible to write neoliberalism off as simply a pointless synonym for capitalism. Yet, I think it's important to be able to recognise that neoliberalism represents a very specific form of that broader system of organising society. Since its implementation during the 1970s and 1980s, neoliberalism has fundamentally reshaped our world. David Harvey has argued that we can view neoliberalism as, from the very beginning, a project to achieve the restoration of class power. And it seems hard to argue against the notion that 4 decades of neoliberal reforms have stacked the odds increasingly in favour of economic elites. And while that might seem like a grandiose statement, it's worth noting that this has a visceral impact on many of our everyday lives. The growing prevalence of the gig economy, something that I'd like to make an entire video on at some point. If that sounds of interest, do let me know below. As well as insecure and precarious labour more broadly, is something which would never have arisen in that post-war era of governmental oversight, union influence and workers' rights. Neoliberalism, however, has empowered our employers, who are often large, faceless corporations very much at a distance to us, to make increasing demands of us, and ensured that we have little recourse when faced with unsatisfactory working conditions or rates of pay. More crucially, however, neoliberalism has reshaped the way that we think about the world, and invited us to view society, in short, as itself a market, in which we are all simply rational economic actors looking to make a quick buck. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it's been useful in giving you a bit of a grounding in neoliberalism, both as a sort of system of political thought, but also an actually existing system in which we all live. Thank you once again to Michael B. Brown and to Ash, my top patrons. If you are interested in supporting what I do here, I would really appreciate you checking out my Patreon page. I'll link it down below. But other than that, sharing the video or a thumbs up in the likes thing is always super appreciated. Thank you so much for watching once again, and have a great week.
Hello YouTubers, hello subscribers, thanks for tuning in. Let's talk a little bit about high performers and why they will always fail when they're in the care or in the hands of a narcissist. First, let's talk about what a high performer is, and I'm referring to on the job. A high performer is someone who comes in and immediately starts making an impact. They contribute at a high level, they're innovative, they're creative, they have a lot of energy, they apply themselves heavily and directly towards their work. They give something called discretionary effort, which is basically effort above and beyond what is required to get the job done. Business partners, other individuals in the company immediately take notice of this person's performance and generally have fairly good things to say about this person. They stand out from the crowd mainly because of that extra effort they put towards all of their work. They're very thorough, they have strong work ethic, and they take a lot of pride in their work. So that's what I'm referring to when I talk about high performers. They usually have a paper trail in terms of kudos and congratulations that others have given to them, bonuses, awards. Their work has been rewarded, is my point. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a high performer. So let's talk about the narcissist, and in particular the narcissistic boss, but it doesn't always have to be your boss in order for you to fail in this particular role. So that's why I said the narcissist and not fail with the narcissistic boss, but they're interchangeable in this case. So here's what happens. Here's the cycle. High performer applies for a job. It gets picked up by HR. They get brought in for an interview. Immediately, either during the interview or immediately after the interview, the high performer is offered this job. And let's say, for the sake of this example, it's the narcissistic boss. The narcissistic boss offers the high performer the job. High performer is excited. They're super pumped to start a new role. A week or two goes by, they start their new job and they start immediately excelling, taking off, making great contributions, and really doing great things that are moving the company and pushing the company forward. They might be bringing in more money. Maybe they save the company money. Whatever the case is, they're really showing everyone why they got hired for the job. So the high performer is happy. And for a little while, the high performer will think, I finally found my niche. I finally found the place where I can plant and thrive and succeed, and I don't have to go on this job hunt anymore, and I can finally settle in. Somewhere along the line, I want to say probably around the 2 or 3 month mark, the high performer will start to receive very vague, unfounded feedback that's not based in reality. Usually from the narcissistic boss or a narcissist that has some type of impact on this person's future and career at this job, this company. And it throws the high performer off because if you look at their track record, it doesn't match the feedback that they're receiving. So being the high performer that they are, what they usually then do is internalize that feedback and then ramp their efforts up in an effort to make that negative feedback go away. Now, let's keep in mind all throughout this that we're talking about this person is dealing with a narcissist or a narcissistic boss, not a healthy situation. I'll tell you what happens in the healthy situation. They get this vague, so continuing on, they get this vague feedback. It worries them because, again, these are people who take pride in their work. So then they start to go above and beyond even the discretionary effort they were already giving, which ultimately leads to burnout. And now their performance is sincerely starting to fail, to which the narcissist latches onto and gives them even more feedback that weighs them down and drags them down. So it sounds a little bit something like, oh, we've noticed that you're not your normal happy self. You used to be so positive. You seem so frustrated lately. You seem so disconnected lately. What's going on? You know, what's going on is this person is spinning their wheels trying to figure out how to satisfy this feedback they've been given. And the reason they burn out is because there is no satisfaction to the feedback, because it's usually not true, or it's exaggerated, or it's some type of gaslighting form of feedback. One of their favorites is people are saying. And if you're a good boss, a good leader, generally you will not deliver feedback that's that vague. If you really want to make changes and see someone make changes, you have to be specific. Because if someone says to you, people are saying, what is your first question going to be? Who are these people, right? And the high performer wants to know that too. So they get these little vague nuggets of feedback, or they'll do excellent on a project. And the narcissist will latch on to something that's kind of irrelevant, but they'll use that as a basis of bad performance. So then the high performer ramps up their efforts to satisfy something that's not even real. They burn out, and now their performance is actually starting to suffer. So now the narcissist latches onto that like food, and they're eating it up, and they're giving this person all this feedback. And so high performers don't quit easily. So a high performer is going to say, well, give me advice, give me examples, give me steps, tell me what to do to get better. The narcissist will never have an answer for you. Never. They will never have an answer for you because they can't. Because what they're telling you doesn't really exist. It's not really real. So you can't correct a problem that doesn't actually exist. And that's what makes you crazy. And that's what makes you burn out. So then the person is in the process of burning out. And if they stick around too long, generally what will happen is they start to get performance counseling, or they start to get write-ups, or they start to have the serious conversations about their future. So now this person is moved from burnout to depression because they don't know what they've done wrong, and all they can reflect on is how well they started and where they are at their current state. This person is dealing with a narcissist, a narcissistic company, or a narcissistic boss. And the sad part is they will actually never win against any of those three that I just named. They'll never win. They'll burn out. Their performance will suffer to the point where either they'll have to quit or they will be fired. So let's kind of look at that. How does a person go from high performing to low performance? This is the question that companies are not asking. Well, mainly because most of them are set up by narcissists. I won't go down that rabbit hole on this video. I'll go down that rabbit hole in another video. But most companies have a very narcissistic structure in place. The companies that are experiencing the highest retention right now are those who have completely banished that type of behavior and that type of thinking. But if you're in a narcissistic setup of a company, you're not going to win, because keep in mind, narcissists have no pride. They have nothing to lose, is what I mean. So they'll keep playing this game with you until you die. Honestly, you could kill over with a heart attack and they could care less. They could not care less, and they'll be disappointed because now they have to find a new toy to play with. They went too far with this one, so now they have to find a new toy to play with. But anyway, the question that companies really need to ask themselves is, how does a person go from high to low performance in a span of 6 months to a year, whatever it may be, okay? Not a span of 30 days, 90 days, because most people put forth their best foot when they first start a job. So I could see how someone could go from high to low in a very short time frame, because they were probably just pretending anyway. But how does a person consistently deliver at a high level for a period of 4, 5, 6 months, 7 months, and then suddenly take a nosedive? And if that is the case, why is that grounds for dismissal and not development? Do you see what I'm saying? So let's kind of back up and look at the exact same example with a healthy company, healthy people, healthy bosses. You come in as a high performer, and actually you probably won't ever take the nosedive because you're dealing with healthy people. But let's just say, for the sake of argument and for the sake of example, you come in as a high performer, you perform at a high level for 7 months straight, and then suddenly you take a nosedive. Assuming you're not in a narcissistic situation, a healthy company is going to look and say, this person has really produced for us. They've given us their best. They've always delivered high quality work. They've been really great to work with, really awesome coworkers. What happened? Let's talk to them. Let's ask questions. Let's see if there's something we can do to support them. Maybe something's going on in their life that they have no control over, and it's creeping into their work life, but we care about this person. We don't want to lose them. We also don't want to go through the hiring process again. Let's see if we can figure out what's wrong to fix it, because it makes no sense for a person to go from high performance to low performance when they have a track record of high performance. A narcissistic company, however, is going to take the approach of, you have to perform at 100% at all times, no matter the circumstances, no matter how we've set it up for you to fail or succeed. And if you even so much show a sign of human frustration, burnout, exhaustion, we're just going to get rid of you. And that's how a lot of them operate. You know, their first approach is not remedy. Their first approach is punishment, okay? And what's interesting is, a lot of times people are being punished for very natural reactions to causes, simple cause and effect. So they're dealing with someone who's a problem, who probably has been a problem, is probably a documented problem. And because they start to show signs of wear and tear as a result of dealing with this person, instead of the company saying, maybe we need to take a look at who we have leading our people, the company says, well, we're going to protect this person and get rid of you. And we're going to maintain this unhealthy individual in our midst. I did a video called Narcissistic Safe Havens, and a lot of companies are narcissistic safe havens. But I want to take another spin on this video and talk a little bit about what causes that, how the narcissist actually takes that approach with the person and causes them to take the nosedive. What actually is contributing to that? Here's what it is. You guys by now probably know that I love analogies and metaphors. So picture a dark room. It's pitch black in the room, and someone brings in a light, or maybe there's a light in the room that has a dimmer switch on it, okay? And so someone walks in and slowly starts turning the light up, and you can slowly start to see everything that's in the room, okay? But the person doesn't just stop once they've gotten the light on, they keep turning the light on until now it's actually too bright. So now everyone in the room is squinting, and you can see everything in the room. You can see every scuff on the wall. You can see every piece of dirt and dust in the corner. You can see all the cobwebs because the light is so bright. Okay? So some of you already know where I'm going with this. When the narcissist hires the high performer, the room is dark. Okay? The high performer comes in, and with each contribution they make, the light turns up a little bit, right? At first, it's great because everyone can see. Oh my gosh, we've been in the dark for so long. We can finally see now. But what happens is, as the light keeps turning up, in other words, as the high performer continues to do great things, continues to ask questions, continues to try to improve processes, the light is getting brighter and brighter, and now we can see all the dirty laundry in the room. Now we can see all the dirt on the walls. We can see all the trash on the floor, all the cobwebs. And narcissists hate that. Narcissists need to live in a dim little world where no one can see what's going on. And they operate very well in that circumstance. They operate very well in the shadows, in the darkness. They really don't prefer light, but they'll take a little bit of light just so they can see where they are. But don't turn it all the way up, because then you are exposed. So the high performer actually exposes the narcissist. The high performer exposes the safe haven. They expose the company for who they are, and oftentimes they do it without even trying. Oftentimes they do it just by being themselves. They expose all of this stuff. So that's why the narcissist likes them at first, because it helps them see. Because if you'll recall, narcissists don't really like to do a lot of thinking. They don't really like to do a lot of creating. They have to keep everything kind of stable, steady Eddie, in order to keep the mask in place. It's a very fragile mask. It slips very easily. It's not in place with crazy glue, okay? More like Elmer's, maybe the glue stick, okay? And so the high performer comes in and makes it very difficult for them to continue on as they have. The high performer asks questions that demand answers, not in a rude way, just in an inquisitive way. Why do you all do it that way? How did you all come to that conclusion? And when there aren't good answers, and you're in a place where people are accustomed to just not speaking up, not questioning anything, that's the equivalent of turning that light on so bright that now we're squinting, okay? And that's why the narcissist has to get rid of you, because the longer you're around, the more accountable the narcissist and that company has to be. The more questions they have to answer, the more they actually have to be responsible with their decisions and their choices and the way that they treat their employees. So the high performer is just a bright light that comes in as a dimmer. It comes in very dim, and over time becomes so bright the narcissist can't take it and has to get rid of you, because they don't want to have to do anything different. I actually this is kind of a sidebar. So if you're done with this topic, you can stop the video now, but I'm going to keep going. I predict in about 20 years or so, we will see businesses take off in a very good direction. And the reason that I predict that is because a lot of these narcissists are still in place. We've got about 10 to 15, about 20 years before they are all gone, before they've all retired and gotten out of these positions of power. Sure, some of them will stick around on boards of directors, and all that's fine. And I know that narcissists have kids, and they'll put their little baby narcissists in their positions. I know that's going to happen. But I think overall, eventually, these businesses will be relinquished to business practices that really support the human being. And when human beings are supportive, they're incredibly productive, because I believe it's in humans' nature to want to be effective, to want to produce, to want to contribute. I think that's in humans' nature, but conditions have to be right for a person to thrive. And right now, there are a lot of companies, a lot of narcissistic safe havens, and they have a lot of people in positions of power maintaining the status quo. But the beautiful thing is they can't maintain it forever. They have to retire eventually. And they're doing it. They're retiring little by little, slowly but surely. They're moving out of these positions. And I think we will see a surge in business. I really believe we'll see kind of like a golden era in terms of people going on jobs, liking their jobs, feeling like they're fairly paid, but more than the pay, feeling like they're fairly treated, okay? So a high performer will go to a company, and that company will fight tooth and nail to keep that person. This person is helping them make money. This person is helping boost morale. This person is helping take this company to the next level. They will not be so easy to dismiss people like that in the future. In the future, people like that will be so highly sought after that they'll probably spend a lot of their time telling companies, no, I'm happy. I'm happy where I'm at. Thank you so much for the offer. Thank you for the consideration, but I am happy here. And companies will be throwing money at them, begging them to come work for them, and actually treat them well when they get there. It's just going to take some time, you guys. It's going to take some time. I feel like right now we're shaking off a really bad cold. Like the way things are right now, the state of affairs in the world is like a really nasty flu that planet Earth has. I do believe we're in the process of shaking it off, even though it doesn't look like it. I do believe sometimes things get worse before they get better. And I think we're at the worst part of the flu right now, but I do think it's getting ready to peak. If you guys can just hang in there, if you learn, the more you learn, the more you share your ideas, the more you change your behaviors, that's how we change the world. And that's why I'm doing this channel. So I thank you all for listening. I thank you, all my new subscribers. Thanks for joining in. Welcome to the team. Thanks to everyone who's been commenting down below. I've been responding to some comments and liking a whole bunch of them. So I really have a lot of fun down there in the comment section. I hope you guys do too. But as always, thank you for tuning in. And I'm going to close my videos with this from now on. I grant you the permission to exist. Take care.
If you've been in a relationship with a narcissist or another cluster B personality, I'm about to say a few things that I know you've heard before. And either you've heard these things verbatim or you've heard some variation of them. So in this video, we're going to explore 7 things narcissists say to excuse their bad behavior and keep you under control. If you're ready, stay tuned. Welcome to the Common Ego community. My name is Christina, and on this channel we talk about narcissistic abuse, its connection with spirituality, and we attempt to answer the question, where do we go from here? So if that all sounds good to you, be sure you're subscribed, and if you're already subscribed, thank you and welcome back. So let's get to those 7 things narcissists say to excuse their bad behavior and keep you under control. The first thing you're likely to hear from a narcissist is some variation of, it's all your fault. So yes, I yelled. Yes, I raised my voice. Yes, I stonewalled you. Yes, I cheated. But it's your fault. This blame shifting is very, very common when you're dealing with a narcissist or another cluster B personality, any emotionally abusive person, really. But especially narcissists have trouble being held responsible for their actions. They can do all the bad stuff, but if you try to point out something that they did wrong, they may lie about it, and if they can't lie about it, it becomes your fault. They need an out, and you're that out. But if you've heard this before, you should definitely know, hopefully you do know by now, whatever the narcissist does, all of their bad behavior is not your fault. We all have to take responsibility for our own actions, and that includes narcissists, even though they never will. So whatever they do, you didn't make them do it. Their reaction to whatever you did is something that they should own. They won't, they can't, but they should own it. It's not yours. So the second thing that narcissists often say to shift blame and keep you under control is that you're crazy and maybe you're jealous. So this will often come up when the narcissist is cheating. They might say, well, of course you're going to act that way, or of course you're going to say that because you're crazy and you're jealous. And this can even come out just when you ask a simple question like, where were you yesterday when you went MIA and you weren't answering my texts? Or what did you do when you were at your ex's house? Simple questions that an emotionally healthy person who isn't hiding anything would have no trouble answering. But a narcissist who is hiding something is going to turn it around on you. So they're going to make it so you're defending yourself so they don't have to answer the question. Another thing that narcissists often say is, good luck replacing me. Good luck finding someone else to put up with you. Good luck finding someone else who makes as much money as I do, or somebody who's as attractive as I am. And when they say things like that, what they're doing is they're trying to imply that you actually don't deserve them and that they're lowering themselves to be with you. So good luck finding someone else who would do that. But if you've ever heard this, I hope your response was, thank goodness. Thank goodness I will not find another you. Because the narcissist does not see that they have the flaws that they actually do. They don't see that they're emotionally abusive and that they're destroying your sense of self-worth and self-esteem. They don't see or take responsibility for the impact of their actions. They only see the grandiose version of themselves, so why wouldn't you be happy to be with them? But when they say something like, good luck replacing me, or you'll never find someone like me, the appropriate response is, thank goodness, thank goodness. If I never find anyone like you ever again, my life will be good. Another thing that you're likely to hear from a narcissist in an argument, or even whenever you're pointing out something that they need to change. So what you'll get is, here we go again. Insert eye roll, right? They can't be bothered. They can't be bothered. You're bringing up the same things again and again because there are problems that an emotionally healthy person would recognize and work on. But the narcissist does not recognize them and does not work on them. So you do end up repeating yourself. You do end up beating your head against the wall to try to get this person to see what is so clear and so plain, but they won't do it. They won't do it. They can't do it. So whenever you bring up the same thing again, it's not really, the problem isn't really that you're bringing up the same thing again. The problem is that the same thing is happening again, but they don't see it again and they don't take responsibility for it. So they're going to try and turn it around on you and say, well, oh, here you go again, bringing up this old stuff. And they might say something like, I thought we resolved this already. And that kind of response makes you wonder because you're thinking, well, yeah, I did too, but then you're doing the same thing again. I'm confused. But again, turning it back around on you so they don't have to take responsibility for their bad behavior. And if you're questioning yourself, they have you under control. So another thing that the narcissist may do to excuse their bad behavior and to keep you under control is a form of triangulation. So they might say something like, I've never had this problem with any other boyfriend or girlfriend, or I've never had this problem. I don't have this problem with your brother or sister, or I never have this problem with any of my other friends. And this one, understanding this one is a little bit tricky because that might be something that you say to the narcissist too, because you recognize that this relationship is unlike anything else. But when it comes from somebody who's emotionally abusive, it's very likely a lie, because we know that these people are extremely predictable. So how they act in your relationship is very likely how they acted in a previous relationship or how they act with someone else. And even if it's not, they're still triggering that person. They're still abusing that person in some way. Even when we're talking about a narcissistic parent who has a golden child, it's not necessarily a healthy relationship. So there's always some level of abuse. They may say, well, I don't have this problem with this other person. I don't have this problem. I never had this problem with my most recent ex. It's only you. And this, again, make no mistake about it, this is triangulation. They are trying to establish a hierarchy, and you're not at the top. Whoever it is they're comparing you to is at the top, and you're at the bottom. So another thing you may hear from a narcissist trying to excuse his or her bad behavior is, you're making a big deal out of nothing. You always do this. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. And while that can be a valid statement for people, sometimes people do overreact. Sometimes people do make mountains out of molehills. But with an emotionally abusive person like a narcissist, Usually it's something very important that you're talking about, like maybe the narcissist is cheating, or maybe they're lying to you about finances, or something of that nature, something that's really important. You're bringing it up because it's an issue, and it's something that in any relationship would need to be addressed. And they make it seem like you're overreacting. This isn't the big deal that you're making it seem to be. They might also say, you like to cause arguments or pick fights, and if it's not this, it would be something else. And if you're not a narcissist, that can have an effect on you, because you recognize that you do have a lot of issues with this person. But the reason why you have a lot of issues with this person is because there are a lot of issues to have. You're in a relationship with somebody who can't self-reflect, and therefore any issues you have are going to be recurring, they're going to be ongoing. And you're also in a relationship with somebody who lacks emotional empathy, so they have no problem hurting your feelings. So there are going to be things that come up, quite possibly on a daily basis. There are going to be things that you're taking issue with. So when the narcissist turns it back around on you, you might start thinking, maybe it is you. Maybe I should just let things go. And how convenient is that for the narcissist? You suspect this person's cheating, but yet you're sensitive about how often you've brought this up. So you don't say anything, you let it go. And this is how the narcissist keeps you under control. So the last thing I have for you today, something that narcissists often say, is your actions are hurting these other people. So when a narcissist realizes that they're losing control over you, and you're not buying into the other things the narcissist typically says to keep you under control, you're starting to break free, they're very likely to use other people to make you feel guilty. So here's an example. You have gotten no contact with the narcissist in your life, or extreme gray rock. You only see them when you absolutely have to, and you have absolutely nothing to say to them. In doing so, in the process, you've likely realized that you've had to cut a few people out of your life as well. And it might be the narcissist's family, and it might be mutual friends, or even some of your own family members. And these are really tough decisions to make. But if you've identified that these people are flying monkeys, that they're going to go back to the narcissist and tell them things about you, then you've made the right decision. But the narcissist is likely to make you feel guilty for it. And they're very likely to bring it up, whether it's true or not. They're very likely to say, oh, well, so-and-so is heartbroken, or, I can't believe you cut this person off. That's so cold and heartless. They're likely to play on your emotions towards people who aren't narcissists, because it's more likely to work. You're more likely, once you've identified that someone is a narcissist and you know what you have to do, even though it's hard, even if you're still in the trauma bond and everything in you tells you that you want to go back, you know what you have to do and you're willing to do it. When it comes to the other people, the narcissist knows that they can get to you. So they might use other people to make you feel guilty for cutting the narcissist and possibly cutting other people out of your life. And the goal with making you feel guilty is to get you back under control. So if you let these people back into your life and they are flying monkeys, the narcissist is going to learn more about you, and they're going to have a path to get to you. These people may tell you information about the narcissist, and they may get information from you and give it to the narcissist. So that narcissist has an open path again where you had previously closed it. So it's just another way to get you under control. You can be sure that the narcissist does not care about anyone else's emotions. They don't care that somebody else has hurt feelings. They don't. They're only bringing it up to get to you. Okay, so those are 7 things the narcissist may say in your relationship to excuse their own bad behavior and to keep you under their control. If you have more, let me know in the comments. I'm sure you do. And if you like this video, please let me know by hitting that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you can be notified when I post new videos. And I'll see you next time.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. In this video, I want to address the real cause of high turnover for many organizations across the country. And that is the case of having a high number of narcissistic bosses, leaders, and managers running the organization. When you talk to a leader or boss of one of these organizations and you ask them about the turnover, more often than not, they'll cite the market. They'll say, oh, the market is so much better now. Jobs have really picked up. Employees have options now. And so that's the excuse that they rely on to address why their turnover is 20, 25, 30%. Sometimes it'll be the industry that they'll blame. They'll blame the industry itself. So they'll say, well, that's the restaurant industry, or, well, that's the retail industry. So their introspection